Laura. So I just want to start off by thanking the IHFA for asking me to present on your webinar this evening. And I've been in touch with Laura beforehand, and I decided what I do is present some of the most relevant information we have on dairy production from Lyons Farm as an update. And then also I have some questions that have been posed by IHFA members as well in the last number of days. So I'm going to talk about the UCD Lyons-based high output spring milk production system, and just to acknowledge that there are a lot of different researchers at UCD involved in this project. So as you know, the predominant dairy production system in Ireland is a low input, low output system. And typical milk solids production, it might be 420 kilos of fat and protein per cow per year on average, but it's not much different to 400 kilos of fat and protein per cow per year. So generally speaking, it's a grass-based, low input, low output, seasonal production system, with cows calving in the spring and fed very little throughout the year. However, there are reasons now, we believe, to consider a grazing system that's based on high output per cow. And I think there's a lot of attention has been put on the fact that our recent increases in milk output have been due to increased cow numbers. And to be honest, increased cow numbers don't sit very well, at least with some concerns regarding the environment. For example, by 2030, we have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 25%. And we have the continual issue of the nitrates directive and the revised rules maybe reducing stocking rate again. And again, these are all environmental concerns that relate to our dairy herd. Apart from the environmental concerns, many farms experience limited availability of land and fragmented land resources. We have limited buildings and infrastructure on many farms. So when we try to increase output by increasing cow numbers, these are constraints that we always come up against. And on top of that, we have limited skilled labour available. So the question arises as to, for a farmer who wants to increase output, whether that person would be better off to increase output on a per cow basis and move to a model of high output dairy production. So some questions that we might pose that we feel are very relevant for Irish dairy production. Is it possible at a national level to produce the amount of milk that we want with less cows? Is it possible to maintain the same number of dairy farm businesses with less cows and lower stocking rates per farm? And if we don't consider these issues, will increasingly lower stocking rates be forced upon us through the Nitrates directive, for example? And then if some farms did adopt a high output grass-based model, will this help industry sustainability? So if we had less cows and cows producing more milk, would we be better off? And for argument's sake, we might be able to produce the same amount of fat and protein that we produced in 2024 with 1.25 or 1.3 million dairy cows. And would that be better for our national methane inventory? Would it be better for the total load of nitrogen going into Irish rivers? How would the EU committees view that change if we had a dairy industry based on lower cow numbers, still providing the same amount of milk output, still supporting the same number of farm businesses? But if we had lower cows, would the EU committees that are considering the nitrates derogation, would they view that in a favourable way? So look, at the beginning, we thought there was plenty known about low output dairy production, a lot of good work done in Teagasc and in Dairy NZ. There's a lot known about high output dairy production in a confinement scenario published internationally. However, we were really worried about or considering high output grazing, where we might have high solids output per cow and per hectare, where we would have fertility and output goals. We wanted to maintain a grass focus. We wanted a scenario where we had high output per individual, so stocking rate would be less than maximum, a moderate use of purchased feed, and critically where the farm business would be sustainable with lower cow numbers. So some of the research aims we had were to develop a profitable high output grass-based spring milk production system, to incorporate the most recent advances in grassland management into a high output system, to use a cow type that had good genetic indices for both production and fertility, to employ the best practices from nutrition and dairy cow husbandry point of view, to incorporate nutritional studies into a high output system, and to take on board system attributes that would improve environmental sustainability of the production system. So very simply, we believe that a high output grass-based spring milk production system could be profitable if it was built on a foundation of good grassland management and meeting performance targets, and that system would have a place in a sustainable Irish dairy industry. And we simply believed we needed good grassland management, good genetics, good nutrition and husbandry. So the system targets that we chose at the start, the stocking rate on the milking platform, 3.27 livestock units per hectare. Stocking rate on the whole farm, as it was in 2024, is 2.07 livestock units per hectare. For the first number of years, that figure was 2.3 livestock units per hectare, and it had to decline in line with the reduction in organic N allowed from 250 to 220 kilos in the hectare. The target that we had for output was for a milk solid yield of 625 kilos of fat and protein, and we believed in order to do that we needed to have a milk yield per cow between 7,500 and 8,000 kilos. 6-week in calf rate that we chose was 75%, and we believed that that was a good target, and that would be consistent with good reproductive performance in a seasonal calving herd. The amount of concentrate we thought that we'd need would be 1.5 tonne. That was based on the amount of energy we thought our cows needed, but also on the amount of grass that we thought we'd grow in a year. And then finally, the percentage of our diet as grazed grass and grass silage more than 75%. And it's important to say that that more than 75% is on a dry matter basis. And indeed, this system complies with the Board BA grass-fed standard because it's more than 90% grazed grass and grass silage on an as-fed basis. So the feed budget then that we designed, if you like, to meet this target is outlined on the slide that we're now considering. And there are a few points about this feed budget. And the first thing is that there are only 3 feeds: grass silage, grazed grass and concentrate. The other thing that you'll note there is that our cows get fed concentrate every day, basically, of the lactation. They start and they get fed 8 kilos of concentrate, and that drops down to 3 kilos. And that's the way we did things for the first 9 years of the project. At that time, we were assuming that our cows would ingest 3.5 tonnes of fresh grass. And in fact, in recent years, that 3.5 tonne of fresh grass consumed hasn't been achieved due to poor grass growth rates. And hence, we've had to increase concentrate feeding and also grass silage feeding. So this is the feed budget that we have adapted for 2025. And you'll see concentrate feeding is increased, in fact, to 1.8 tonne. And grazed grass is now at 2.8 tonne, which we feel is more realistic given recent grass growth measurements at Lyons Farm on an annual basis, and grass silage has increased to about 2.5 tonne of dry matter. So that's the target feed budget. It changed this time. For the previous 9 years, it was 1.5 tonne of concentrate as fed. And it's important to say that that target feed budget will still comply with the Board BA grass-fed standard. In terms of the herd performance, we now have 9 years of data on the herd. This herd runs obviously at Lyons Farm, and it's based on between 55 and 60 cows, as you can see there up at the top of the slide. And you can see there in red the yield per cow in kilograms actual and the milk solids per cow in kilograms actual. And these are probably the most important figures on the slide. So the target level of milk solids production, we said, was 625 kilos of fat and protein. And what we achieved, in fact, in terms of the 9-year average, was short of that, 583 kilos of fat and protein. And that's using 1.5 tonne of concentrate in each of the years. And it's including a number of years that we had very poor grass growth in. And we'll talk about that more as we go through. So that's where the production has been: 583 kilos of fat and protein. Roughly 7% short of our target. Now, our geneticist, Professor Alan Fahey, has a lot of input on animal breeding. And you can see here the herd genetic profile. So this is for November 24. you can see at that point the overall EBI was in the top 5%. The milk sub-index was in the top 1%, and the fertility sub-index was in the top 15%. It's interesting, we brought in some heifers in 2025, and again, for the first time in the 10th year, we made some changes. So we brought in 16 dairy heifers, 10 were
Finbar, I think you might be muted.
Hello, Laura.
You're back there now, Finbar.
Oh, was I muted for long, Laura?
You're muted. I'd say just go back to the last slide, I'd say.
Okay, on genetics.
Yes, yes.
That's
actually, you're probably fine just to start this slide. Sorry, you're probably fine to start this slide again.
Okay. So look, the overall EBI of the herd from November 2024, you can see we were in the top 5%, a figure of 247. The milk sub-index was 86, and the fertility sub-index was in the top 15%. In 2025, then, we brought in 16 heifers. Some of these 10 of them, in fact, were identified and purchased off farm. And you can see here that they had quite a different genetic profile. If you look at the maintenance sub-index, it's very close to 0. And you can see there the milk kilos figure, and the PTA for milk kilos is quite high. And that's quite deliberate by our geneticist to target animals that might give us a better chance to produce high output. You can see then for all of the years since the beginning that our overall EBI has been quite high. And in fact, we've just recently started to slip out of that top 1% for overall EBI. Our milk sub-index has always been high, and our fertility sub-index, as you can see there, has always been in the kind of the top 10%, and indeed I think it's in the top 15% from the November 2024 evaluation. In terms of breeding and reproductive performance, you can see on the slide here, we typically have a 10-week breeding season. This year, I think we started the 29th of April. And you can see there 2016 up to 2024. And if you look, you see the submission rate. The submission rate is normally quite good. The first service conception rate, you can see it started off quite poor, but generally it's quite good. And you can see the 6-week pregnancy rate, apart from a couple of years at the start where it kind of took a little while for things to kick into place, generally is quite good. And I think the average 6 weeks pregnancy rate for the first 9 years is 77%. So overall, with fertility, we're quite happy and have been over the last number of years. You can see here the dairy bulls that were used in 2024. And look, I'm not the person to be talking to with regard to the genetics. I'm sure you all know Alan Fahey quite well, and Alan has a big input into our breeding decisions. But just to show the group this evening, they're the dairy bulls that were used in 2024. And normally what we do is we use black and white semen on maiden heifers and first lactation cows, and then there might be a small number of elite cows that we'll select for black and white sexed semen, and the rest of the time then we'll use beef semen. In terms of grassland management then, the herd is managed on 17.4 hectares of a milking platform on 10 hectares of an outblock. And we use a lot of the typical grassland management techniques like the spring rotation planner, the grass wedge, the autumn rotation planner, etc. We'll bale to manage surpluses. If a paddock hasn't been grazed out well, we might try and take bales off that as well. And we'll top paddocks if we need to do that. In terms of the grassland performance, one of the most important things is the amount of grass that we grow. And you'll see there that the 9-year average is 12.56 tonne of dry matter per hectare. And it's really interesting because the 8-year average up to 2023 was 13.8 tonnes of dry matter per hectare. And we're coming into 2024 expecting on average 13.8 tonnes of dry matter per hectare. And in 2024, what we got is 9.3 tonne. So that's an extremely much reduced grassland performance than what we'd like. And in fact, if you look at 2022, 2023 and 2024, you'll see that those 3 years are all quite poor from the point of view of grass production. And hence our feed budget has had to be revised with less reliance on fresh grass and more concentrate feeding and more grass silage feeding. And you can see, in fact, that's our grass growth curve for 2024. And you can see there for a lot of the time in the middle of the year, the 2024 line, which is right at the bottom there, is much lower. And in fact, I think I'm correct in saying that we were feeding silage from June 2024 right to the end of the lactation. One of the big reasons for that is a lower amount of rainfall for significant times in 2024. And you can see 2024 in the green line there, having lower amounts of rainfall for a lot of that summer period. Now, it wasn't just due to rainfall and soil moisture deficit. There were issues around soil P and soil K. And we have tried our best to address those. And we think actually they are well addressed at this point. So over the first 9 years, then we grew 12.6 tonne of grass. And as I say, particularly in the last 2 to 3 years, grass growth has been quite poor, and in fact has led us to revise our feed budget. So we use a lot of the typical grassland management tools. As I said, we do annual soil sampling, we have a nutrient management plan, we use protected urea, low emissions slurry spreading, and certainly at many of the paddocks we've attempted to incorporate white clover. We reseed about 10% of the milking platform each year, and the guys they select the best swards available to them from the pasture profit index. You know, from the point of view of reseeding, the technique will vary, and the maintenance of clover, for example, you know, it might be that it's stitched in, and some of the paddocks will have tetraploid only swards, which we think are suited maybe to drier paddocks, and we think they're quite good for intake. So over the first 8 years then, over the first 9 years, you see the data there for milk solids output. It's 583 kilos of fat and protein. 6-week in calf rate is 77%. Concentrate is exactly 1.5 tonne. We did not vary for that for the first 9 years. And you'll see there the percentage of the diet as grazed grass and grass silage, 77%. So that was the story on a lot of the important production parameters over the first 9 years. In terms of environmental issues, look, we have a lot of different sustainability measures employed. We have good genetics, we have good fertility, low protein diets, native feed ingredients are used. We use a lot of clover. We use a lot of protected urea. We've been trying to reduce chemical in, and we use low emission slurry spreading. Our farm gate nitrogen use efficiency 2021 was about 40%, 39.6%. And in fact, that is very typical of perennial ryegrass based systems. The real gain you'll get in nitrogen use efficiency is where you switch to a perennial ryegrass white clover or a multi-species sward system, and you reduce chemical N from about 250 down to 100 to 150 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. We've also spent a good bit of time looking at feed origin and its impact, and also at low protein nuts and their impact on milk production. So in 2020 and in 2021, we looked at 3 dairy nuts, a 14% protein nut with any ingredient you want, 12% protein nut with any ingredient you want, in other words, non-native ingredients, and a 12% protein nut with only native ingredients. And this is a 14% protein nut that we would have used as a comparison. And you can see there's a lot of imported ingredients. For example, there's maize, which is a brilliant energy supplement, and soybean meal, a fantastic protein supplement. And we looked at that in comparison to a 12% protein native nut. And we were very restricted. You know, everything here had to be possible to source on the island of Ireland. So this nut only contained oats, barley, and beans for the most part. So you didn't have access to maize and soybean meal that are really, really good for energy and protein. However, when we looked at this, and you look there, 2020 and 2021, and when you look at this from the period from May through to October, you'll see there that for milk solids, and there's in fact no significant difference, and there was no significant difference in either year. And that is important to us, because not only did we do it in 2020, but we repeated it in 2021. and that's for the period from May to October as a whole. Now there might be individual weeks early on in that period when grass protein is low, and you can probably see that on this graph, where the 14% commercial nut with the imported ingredients will outperform, for example, the 12% native nut. But in general, for that whole 20-week period, there was no significant impact on milk output. And in fact, we've only used nuts based on native ingredients ever since we did that piece of research. Many people know now that environmental parameters are extremely important, and we need a 25% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And right now, if you go to Lyons, we have 3 green feed units with this group of dairy cows, and they're documenting methane emissions from grazing cows. And we believe that the methane emissions will be lower based on work already done in Teagasc Moor Park. And we're hoping to gather significant data on that, so it can be used in modelling of our methane inventory. In terms of other measurements of carbon footprint, life cycle assessment analysis can be used to measure carbon footprint. And we've done this with quite a bit of methodology behind it and compared it to other Irish estimates of dairy production system. And I've gone past the 2 slides there with all the text. I just used them to show you basically there's quite a bit in this. And we did this in association with the University of Nottingham. And you can see there the life cycle analysis. This gives you an outcome in terms of kilograms of CO2 equivalents per kilo of fat and protein corrected milk. And down at the bottom, you can see estimates from Jonathan Heron and Teagasc for a current scenario and for a future scenario. And the future scenario is the Heron 2022 target scenario. And you can see there that the UCD system, when we use the 12% protein Irish only feed for the year, you can see there actually that the carbon footprint of that treatment is quite good. And that's one of the big reasons that we stuck with the native nut, if you like, ever since that time. So in terms of that research, we've shown protein concentrations as low as 12% in the supplementary dairy nut can sustain milk production for high output grazing cows. And that's quite important because obviously now DAFM will allow you to claim a lower organic N excretion if you can keep your protein less than 13% for the year. And the other thing is supplementary dairy nuts based on a high use of native ingredients. Even though on paper those ingredients mightn't look as good as the imported ingredients, we didn't see any impact of using them on performance. And the final thing is that there's significant advantage of using the native ingredients for the LCA or the carbon footprint. So the reason you would use the low protein is maybe you qualify for this less than 13% protein for the year as a whole, and you'd be able to claim then, if you're a band 3 herd, 98 kilos of organic N excretion instead of 106. And basically that would mean, if you're a band 3 herd, that your max stocking rate at 220 goes from 2.07 to 2.2. I think it's exactly to 2.24 livestock units per hectare, which is significant and could have an impact on profitability. Now, we have an input from many different people. The finances are simulated by Professor Michael Wallace, Professor of Agricultural Economics in the School of Agriculture. And there's a number of things here. The first one is we're going to look at a system comparison with what we call a very efficient low concentrate system. And you can see there some of the parameters. One of the most important things, the whole farm stocking rate, 2.7, versus for the UCD Lyons, which we'll call the medium concentrate grazing system, MCGS, is 2.3. And that difference in whole farm stocking rate is important to consider. It means for a 100-hectare farm that you have 40 less cows. Now, the performance on the very efficient low concentrate system is 465 kilos of fat and protein with 500 kilograms of concentrate dry matter, about 600 kilos of concentrate as fed. And the Lyons system, and at that time 595 was the 3-year average. It's in here at 595 with 1.3 ton of concentrate, which is 1.5 ton at 87 dry matter, in other words, as you'd buy it. So the financial simulation here for 2022 had a specific set of circumstances, a high milk price, but also a high concentrate price. And you see there in 2022, milk-based price 45 cents a litre, concentrate price 500 euros per tonne of dry matter. You can see there that the Lyons system performed quite well. The farm profit there, 3,790 euros per hectare, and the economic profit, when you take into account other things like labour, rent and interest, 2,100 versus 2,046 for the low concentrate grazing system. 2023 was a different set of trading circumstances. Milk-based price was lower, but concentrate price was still high. And you see there in 2023, basically, that we had a lower financial performance, 2,240 versus 2,394 for the very efficient low concentrate system. So still within touching distance of it, even though trading conditions were pretty much against us in 2023. And of course, currently, I think our milk price about 55, and our concentrate price this year, I think, is 356 or something like that. So there are challenges with a high output pasture-based system. You do need to be getting a good yield. So if we go up 1% in milk solid yield, that's worth about 36 euros per hectare. So we're very much chasing that last 7% of performance, and we've made changes to our feed budget in 2025. And we've also made changes to the heifers that we've brought in 2025 to try and get that performance. Margins are more sensitive, particularly to feed price. And you can see that they're plus or minus 1 cent per litre, or milk is worth 174 euros per hectare on the low concentrate system, worth 189 on the Lions system. But if you look at plus 10 euros per tonne of concentrate, it has double the impact on the Lions system, the medium concentrate grazing system, in comparison to the low concentrate grazing system. So in 2024, then our target, our predicted performance in 2024 was 560. I think in 2024 we ended up exactly 563 kilos of fat and protein. And so in 2024, then with the 563 kilos of fat and protein, you can see there our farm profit compared to the 8-year average was down by about 300 euro. So the farm profit was reduced in 2024. Big reason that output was lower in 2024 is that we grew less grass, and we replaced an awful lot of grass with an awful lot of silage. And when you're replacing fresh grass with silage, generally speaking, the nutrition, the plane of nutrition of the animals is not as good. So when does the system make sense from the point of view of the finances? Well, you can see there, I mean, if you have a base milk price of 45 cent a litre or above, it makes sense regardless of concentrate prices. If they go from 350 even up to 450, if you have a base milk price of 40 cent a litre, you can see there even at concentrate prices at 425, you're kind of plus 3 euros. So you know, it's kind of a break even. But at good milk prices that we have today, the simulation would show there at most feed prices that the Lions medium concentrate grazing system makes sense. Now, as everybody knows, nitrate spanding has been an issue, and you know, our cows were assumed to excrete 106 kilos of organic nitrogen in a year. So at a maximum stocking rate of 220 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, that meant that we could max stock our system at 2.07 cows per hectare. And you'll see there, if we drop to 170, in other words, if the derogation goes, we'll be down to 1.6 cows per hectare. And that's with standard protein diets. With low protein diets, you can bring that 2.07 up to about 2.2 or 2.24. Now, that recent reduction in organic N from 250 to 220, you know, that did reduce a maximum permitted stocking rate in both systems by approximately 12%. That did impact predicted profitability, and this is the impact as simulated by Professor Wallace in the School of Agriculture. And you'll see there the median impact on economic profit. So the low concentrate grazing system profit is reduced by 455 euros per hectare. The medium concentrate grazing system, or the Lion system, profits reduced by about 409 euros per hectare. Now, the interesting thing is, since recent times, we could reduce the level of protein in the feed and avail of a higher stocking rate. So if you look at the scenario there, the 220 standard versus the 220 low protein in comparison to the baseline of 2023, if you have 220 with the low protein, your economic margin per hectare is reduced by 6%. 220 with a standard level of protein, your max stocking rate is only 2.07. So your economic margin is reduced by 18%. And you can see there, if there's no derogation, it's a worrying scenario indeed. Even with a low protein regime adapted on the farm, you're talking about a reduction in economic margin by approximately 41%, and with standard protein by 49%. So there are some of the financial simulations that Professor Wallace and his team have been doing. The performance currently, so 2025 to the end of May, milk solids predicted to the end of May 2025, 262. In comparison to the 2024, it was 243 at the same point in 2024. So hopefully we're ahead. I don't think we're ahead of where we would have been in 2021. In 2021, we produced about 630 kilos of fat and protein for the year, but we're certainly ahead of where we were in 2024. Current performance, or at least a very recent performance, about a week old now, I'd say, 31.3 kilos of milk, 3.9 fat, 3.54 protein. In the diet, 17.5 kilos of grass, dry matter allowance, 6 kilos of concentrate feed. And preliminary data would indicate that we've grown more grass in the spring of 2025, certainly than we did in the spring of 2024. And the breeding 21-day submission rate about 91%. That's preliminary data. We've had one scan so far. So one scan is very promising. Of course, it's all preliminary data at this point. We're now in the 8th week of the breeding season, so we'll only breed this week, next week, and the week after. But we haven't that many scans done, and the scans that we have done, you'll understand, they're all at a very early point. So some questions then from the IHFA members that were posed and sent on to Laura. What are your thoughts on single milk urea figures when cows are milking very well and solids are excellent also? And my thoughts on this are we've often been contacted by the milk processor to tell us our milk ureas are low. And in many of them years, breeding performance was excellent, output was good. So, you know, I would have the view that a dairy cow can recycle 90% of the urea in the blood into the rumen when protein in the diet is low. And that's exactly what they should be doing to be efficient. So I'm not overly worried about milk urea when cows are milking very well and solids are excellent. When milk urea is low, it means the cow will be losing less nitrogen in the urine, and that's good. And that's what will happen if you adapt that less than 13% protein for the year. That's what they'll do, and that's good. It's doing your cows no harm, and it is good for the environment. So that's on that one. I'd have no problem with that. Is there any possibility that milk fat depression is genetic? And yes, just to answer that first part, initially there is a significant genetic component. We found that in work from UCD with Catherine McAloon, and then in fact we looked at milk fat depression in Irish dairy herds with a lot of data from 2014 to 2024, and there is a significant genetic component. So absolutely there is. So milk fat percent PTA, milk fat kilos PTA are significant. Apart from obviously increasing fiber intake and breeding for fat percent, is there anything else we can do to prevent the slump in butter fat? And yes, there certainly is. So, you know, increasing fiber intake there has been mentioned. So maybe increase opening covers on your paddocks, pre-grazing covers, maybe go from 1300 to 1500 if that's possible. But also in the concentrate, avoid low rumen pH. So just be careful to avoid low rumen pH. There's many additives there that can help with that. Also simple dietary formulation, like, you know, not being too high on starch, especially rapidly fermentable starch from wheat. But there are a number of additives as well. We found a response to methionine and amino acids. So amino acids will certainly help with milk fat yield. And maybe some of the protected fat supplements, the C16 fat supplements, there are some of those available, rumen protected fat. And you know, certainly there is some data with Irish herds that they will increase fat yield. So yeah, absolutely. If it's in an indoor scenario, rumen buffers will certainly increase fat percent as well. So the next question, when the protein in feed with the protein in feed restrictions, what would be the expected yields on grass throughout the lactation with a 13% protein nut, and how much grass per day would be fed in your assumptions? Well, dropping as low as 12 had no impact on our level of output, so that's all I can say is, you know, dropping from 14 to 12 had no impact. And we had other research prior to that, you know, dropping from 18 to 14 had no impact on milk solids output. So I think if the quality of the diet is good and I think we're going to have to be good at picking good low protein diets, and I think there will come further refinement with amino acid nutrition. So look, I think you can drop to 12. We've shown that for 2 years in a row without an impact on performance. How much grass per day would be in your feed assumptions? The max intake we'll get, including the concentrated lions, be about 23. There might be 1 or 2 weeks in the year we get 24 kilos of dry matter intake. That's 3.7% of body weight. So I think that's possible. I think, at Lions, we have people who are there to manage the grass. Generally speaking, the grassland management is very good. And in good grazing conditions, 3.7% of body weight is the total. So some of that might be concentrate, and then the remainder should be grass. But in my opinion, that's possible. Our grass allowance at the moment is 17.5. What do I think they're ingesting? Well, in good grazing conditions, I think they'll take in 16 of that 17.5. And then they have another 6 kilos of concentrate there, which is about 5 kilos of dry matter. So that's about 21. But I know some other estimates that we've done in the past that 23 has been consumed in weeks, and I would think is possible. So 3.7% of body weight is possible, in my opinion, based on experience from lions. So can low milk ureas, cause embryonic death? Not in my experience. I mean, I certainly wouldn't, if I was going to do a herd investigation for UCD for the veterinary school, low milk ureas is not something that would cause me a concern. Possibly switching from low to high milk urea, but particularly in grazing cows, the whole story around high milk urea and embryonic death is not really accepted internationally. Maybe a switch from low to high, it might not be great, but low per se, I wouldn't worry about that. And again, there's been many years at Lions that we've seen very low levels of protein in the grass, and that will cause low milk urea. And I don't believe we've seen any reduction in pregnancy rate at the end of the year. So I personally wouldn't worry about that. And would you have an easy chart for recommended feed to yield levels? So I put in this slide. So hopefully this slide is all right, Laura. I've gone as high there as 34 kilos of milk. And you can see there, based on the levels of grass output, basically levels of concentrate needed. So you can see there, if you have 15 kilos of grass consumed, 34 kilos of milk at 3.8% fat, you need to be kind of in around 8 kilos of supplement, 7 to 8 kilos of supplement for 15 kilos of grass. And roughly, a good quality concentrate will be 1 UFL. In every kilo of milk, around 4% fat, you need 0.44 UFL. So for argument's sake, an extra kilo of feed should give you 2 kilos of milk. So hopefully that chart there on feed to yield is helpful. So that's it. Just to say that we're very happy to disseminate all the outcomes from the project at Lions. Very happy to welcome groups to the farm. We often bring groups to the farm and try and convince them that the model, well, not try and convince them, but tell them about the model, and hopefully they see merit in high output milk production. And we've had many visitors, including ministers for agriculture. Just to say that the project is sponsored currently by Dairy Research Ireland. We're very grateful for that. Very grateful also for the support of a group of companies, which included the Irish Holstein Friesian Association. And that group of companies came in under a project called Dairy Tech. And only for that group of companies, the project would never have gotten off the ground. And we're very grateful to that. And we would indeed be very welcome to host IHFA and IHFA groups at Lions when the opportunity arises. And again, just to acknowledge all the different researchers and staff involved, their input is key to all the data that we've shown you. Again, there's a lot of staff at Lions that make this possible, and a lot of postgraduate students. So that's it, Laura. I hope some of that is useful to your members. I'm happy to take questions on it. And just to say that I'm very happy for the slides to be circulated. I've sent them on to Laura there. So if you want, Laura, you can circulate them as a PDF so everyone can have a good look at the slides later on. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Finbar. That's brilliant. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, if you've got time, Finbar, that'd be great. I'm sure people will have some questions. So yeah, if anyone wants to shout away a question, unmute yourself, and work away.
Hi, can I ask a question, please?
Work away.
Absolutely.
Hi, Finbar. Thanks for your presentation. Very informative. I'm somebody that tries to follow the Lions herd system on a weekly basis. One thing I'd ask is that you might put up the herd notes online, maybe a bit more frequent, because during the spring they can often be two weeks behind, maybe even 3 weeks behind, and it's kind of fast moving or changing in the spring. So if it was up more regularly, I could pop on and see what you were doing. That's the first point. Second thing is, do you think it's a struggle to have those high milk predicted cows and have the EBI, because the kilos of milk are negatively weighted under EBI? Do you see that as a restriction to your system?
No. Yeah. So the first thing, no problem on the notes. I take your point fully. Look, we're like everybody else. You know, it can be very hard to fill positions, and actually now we have a good team of people, but it's only in the last number of weeks. So we've hired more people on the project, and that's key for getting the notes up, to be honest. Sometimes we have positions that we can't hire people for, and it's during weeks like that we find it hard to get the notes out on time. But we will remember your point, and it's important to us, so we will address that. We're not afraid of dropping out, for example, of the top 1% overall for EBI. We take our advice from Alan, obviously, and look at Alan has, we have data before actually from a project funded by the department, Nutrigen, and we know that if we don't go high on milk kilos PTA, and if we don't take some bit of a hit on fertility subindex, that we won't have a cow that's responsive. So we want a cow that is high on milk PTA and not as high as possible on fertility subindex. And you'll see as well that new group of heifers that came in now in 2025, and they didn't have they were high on milk kilos and they were low on maintenance subindex. So kind of speaks for itself. We're happy to use the EBI as our tool, but for high output, some parts of it we can't prioritize, and so we can't prioritize a high maintenance subindex. We have to prioritize a high milk kilos PTA, and we can't go top 1% fertility subindex, in my opinion. But and I know that's consistent with what Alan would say, and now he'd be able to put it better than me. But I hope that answers your question.
That's fine, thank you. And just another question is, do you struggle with graze outs? We're constantly told that you will struggle with graze outs if you have the kind of feed levels that we're talking about, as opposed to say 2 kilos of feed, and then you have a deteriorating grass quality. We're constantly told that from the other side of the world. So is that a problem for you?
No, we were told that too, and the last paddock we had where we had a problem with graze out, it was just really bad weather, really wet weather, and we'll top a paddock if we have to. It's not the end of the world. Or if we have a problem with a graze out in a paddock, we'll say, well, if we get a chance to take silage in the next while, we'll take it from that paddock. I'd say 90% of our grasses have OMD, more than 80%, 90, maybe 95% of them. And a phenomenal proportion of them are higher than 18 protein. And within that cohort, and I have to talk to a group of nutritionists tomorrow, nearly 85% are more than 20 protein. So we have no problem with grass quality going to this high input of meal system. None. And I just refute that completely. I think that's bad advice, that you will have a problem with grass quality. No way. Not in 9 years.
Well, yeah, you should read this month's Chagas newsletter, Dairy. But
that's based on 9 years data, and it's based on a sample of grass every single week. So I know where you're coming from bringing it up, and I feel strongly on it. Our grass quality is very good, and from time to time we'll have a problem with graze outs, but we don't see it that the problem is we're feeding too much meal. It could be a high open and cover. It could be that the weather was atrocious, but we'll rectify that. And we publish as accurate financial scenarios as we can. Like, we've no problem topping a paddock if we have to.
Finbar, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
No problem. And we will remember about the notes. Thank you.
Hello, Finbar.
Yes.
Yeah, Finbar, Donal Carey here.
Donal, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Finbar. Well done and a very informative presentation there, as always. And thanks to you and all the team there for the work you're doing over the last number of years. Just a question, just to get your view maybe on do you see a point in trying to gather individual methane data on the cows in the herd to tie that into the efficiency piece?
Yeah, absolutely. And we are currently gathering data funded by the Department of Agriculture on high output grazing cows. And our component of the project is to gather data on relatively high output cows. And I'm conscious that they're not the highest output cows in Ireland, but in comparison to the 400, I think, one of the milk processors I spoke to recently, their average for 2024 was 415, I think I'm right in quoting. So it's quite high, and we do need methane emission inventory for those type of cows, and we are gathering it. And the other thing we'd have an interest in seeing, Donal, would be a simulation for an industry that might be based on a smaller number of higher output cows.
Yes.
So if we had 1.3 million cows in the country and they were all producing 600 kilos of fat and protein, what would that mean for our methane inventory? And I think that's a very important question, and other people have asked that as well. I know Alan has asked that, and Morgan Sheehy has asked that, and Michael Wallace. And again, if you took all the milk, for example, that's produced in the southeast of the country, and you produced all the 400 kilo cows with a lower number of 600 kilo of fat and protein cows, would you have the same total load of organic nitrogen going into the Irish rivers? Because a Bantry cow might produce about 10 kilos more organic N, but they could be producing 50% more milk solids. And I think that's maybe the piece that we're missing. And, for an individual farmer, and we've had a lot of groups come through Lions over the last number of years, and, we're very respectful of groups that come in. But, if you go past 120 cows, the difference in 120 and 170, if you could make the same profitability from 120 cows, are you really married to the last 50? So I think there's a lot to be said. In my mind, there's an awful lot to be said for a lower number of cows producing more. And I think there has to be a basic efficiency within that from an environmental point of view and a resource use point of view that makes sense, in my opinion anyway.
Yeah, no, I'd agree that information and that data would be very useful. So
we're currently looking, we're currently speaking to a number of groups potentially to fund that simulation and maybe hire a full-time researcher to look at that and work up the figures in a very credible way and see what would the impact be on the Irish national methane inventory. For example, if we had 1.3 million cows producing 600 kilos of fat and protein, what would that mean?
Yes.
What would it mean for the total nitrogen going into rivers in the southeast if we were doing it with less cows? I think they're important questions that we need to answer.
Yeah, agreed.
Thanks, Donal.
Any more questions?
Any questions or comments even?
Finbar, Morris O'Connell, back to you. Finbar, do you see you being able to increase the milk solids or just maybe stay where you are? Or where do you see the future for this herd?
I think it's interesting. I'd like to do the target at least, 625 kilos of fat and protein. If you look at the heifers we brought in 2025, I think the future for this herd is to redouble our effort around high output. It's as simple as that, and to do that in an efficient way. And it's interesting, we went up to 1.8 ton of feed in 2025, and we're confident that will still meet the grass-fed standard. So I see the future for this herd as redoubling its commitment to high output and doing that in an efficient way. Still, most of the diet will be grazed grass and grass silage, but we will be redoubling our commitment to high output. And I think that's really, really important, because one of the biggest fears amongst processors, one of the most biggest fears, in my opinion, at least amongst dairy farmers, is that the nitrates derogation won't be there. And if the derogation from the nitrates directive is not there, well, personally speaking, I think then, there would be a lot of interest in a high output grazing system. Processors, in my opinion, would be very interested in a high output grazing system, because where will the milk come from if we don't go for a high output system? And that eventuality hopefully will not come to pass, but if it does, and even if the derogation remains, your 2.07 is the max stocking rate now with standard protein. Will the 220 drop to 210? Who knows? Certainly things haven't been relaxing. They haven't been loosening the belt. They've been tightening it from the point of view of stocking rates.
Can you hear me there, Finbar? This is Pat O'Donovan in Cork.
I can hear you, yes, Pat.
Good man, yeah, no, thanks for your presentation. If you were to feed, I know you're on the grass now, if you had put in a ton or 2 ton of maize in there, how much of an effect would that have on for the grass fed, the board B? Would that take you out of the equation? And in so doing, it would obviously boost your production, because they'd have a bit more energy there at different times during the summer.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it could replace grass silage very usefully. And the big fear would be that you would drop out of the board B or grass-fed standard. But I just wonder, do we need to have a look at that? What's wrong with forage maize grown in Ireland? It's an Irish forage, and we would still be doing a hell of a lot of grazing, even using that ton of maize. Even if you had 3/4 of a ton of maize, Pat, you could still do a hell of a lot of grazing.
Yeah.
And you could still fit the greenfield picture that we want to sell milk all across the world, which is very important. And you could be using a little bit of maize that's grown in Ireland, and
So, like with the cows that you have there, if you were to put, say, 2 ton of maize into them fresh weight, that's you're talking at 30% dry matter. Like, how far off the current rule would you be? And include, say, a ton of meal then.
I can't answer you that, to be honest. I just haven't done it lately. We did do it all right, but I can't remember, Pat. But look, at the reason we went up to 1.8 ton and we stuck with grass and silage was to stay within the board B or grass-fed standard. And I think we need to have a big think about how Irish forages in general are treated. And I'm not only talking about maize. Some people might grow whole crop wheat as an example. But if it's grown on the island of Ireland, surely be to God, that's important. And I think if we're still doing more grazing than anyone else, and there would be a lot of people that could, in a spring calving system, use whole crop. We do it at Lions in the research herd, not in this herd. We would use whole crop, and we still do an awful lot of grazing. And I still think there's a very good story to tell there. And you're still fitting, as I say, the greenfield image. And that's what's important. You see, if everybody put cows inside 365 days of the year, we're no longer a grass-fed green island that we can market all around the world. And we don't want that, but you could still use 3/4 of a ton dry matter of maize silage or whole crop and still do a lot of grazing, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree with you more, yeah. And I think we'd have better cows for it, and we'd have better proteins as well.
Yeah, we need to really consider that, because you look at us there now at Lions, like 9.3 ton of grass in 2024. If you don't have a little bit of flexibility now, okay, the board B a grass-fed standard, as I understand it, is a 3-year average, so there is some flexibility. But like an awful lot of farmers around where I see in the southeast here, I'm in South Kildare. A lot of them do have other forages. Like forage maize is very common around us, and it's common for a reason. It suits their production system, and maybe in dry areas particularly, growing high levels of perennial ryegrass. Well, for the last 3 years, we've struggled at Lions. Simple as that, struggled.
Yeah, everyone has. You're not on your own. We all have. Yeah. No, thanks for that. Interesting. Yeah.
Have we any other comments or questions, lads?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Why are you using dairy nuts and not just straight whole barley?
Well, the nuts, for one reason, they bring the mineral as well. The other thing, So to bring calcium, to bring phosphorus, to bring copper. Our grass is nearly 5 parts per million molybdenum. So I think if we didn't correct for that, we might have a problem. But it brings other things as well. It brings biotin, which is good for their feet. It brings the protein. The only bit of protein in there is from beans, but it brings a bit of protein. And it brings, for example, additives that will protect against acidosis, which I think are important because you're going to a very high starch nut. So that'll be one of the reasons. And the other thing is the nut will flow easy through the auger. But could you use straight barley? Good, of course. Just they're the reasons that I'm after mentioning that I would prefer a nut.
Yeah, well, I'm dry feeding the whole time.
Yeah.
Last year we had 53% first and second calves. We done 490 kilos solids.
Yeah.
This year I'm hoping we brought in on 113. We brought in 15 heifers, and I'm hoping to do 550 this year.
Yeah, very good.
The small base silage, we need to put in a bit of fibre because at times of the year the cows just go mad when they're on the right type of grass.
Yeah.
So what we try to do is just not chop straw, but just separate it all out.
Yes.
And that has solved that problem. There's nights where there were 11 o'clock cows roaring in the field and wouldn't move.
Yeah.
So that has solved our problem by doing that.
Yeah.
But reseeding, our oldest field, I can remember, was reseeded in 79.
Yes.
Last year we grew 15 ton.
Yeah.
So the question is what the kilo solids the cows there that you popped there tonight? Now I didn't see it on it. I came in late. What was the kilo solids per cow per day?
On average, for the last 9 years, 583.
No, the kilo solids per day.
At the minute, 2.4.
Right. Okay. We're on 2.15.
Yeah. So at the minute we're on 2.4.
Yeah.
And,
okay.
Yeah. And I take all your points, and the principles of all of what you're saying are extremely sound and absolutely good. When I walk into our cows, like, they're happy. I was out there Friday morning with them, and God, they were happy. They were getting out to a paddock there along the avenue, going into Lions, and it was actually a dry morning with us Friday morning, and the cows were happy. And I've been at Lions and seen groups of cows that were underfed and they're bawling and stuff. They're not normally like that, and their condition is good. In that group at the minute, we've 2 thin cows out of 55 or 56, 2 of them thin.
Yeah.
And their coats are shining. Like, you'd be happy with them. Walking through them when cows are not right. Like, and used to be better at that than me. Like, but I was happy with them, and I know I like to see them shining. Just before you start breeding them, and I most of the time those cows are good and they're happy. And you say that's what I find with them on that system. I think that system we have, it can work well. Yeah, it can.
Yeah, I think we're not feeding them enough meal.
Certainly, we upped our meal there this year, and look, if the grass is not going to do the job, we'll feed them anyway, and it's as simple as that. And I would make no apology for prioritizing the cow, and sure, like Michael Wallace's assumptions there, sure, we're getting 5 cents a litre for milk now. A couple of months ago it was 58. Like, I mean, if you're not going to feed them this year, when are you going to feed them? Do you know what I mean? Our meal price this year, fair enough, we got a keen price at the start of the year because we put it out for tender. I think it's exactly 3.56, and I know other people might be paying more, but milk price is good, and based on, in my view, it certainly makes sense to feed them at the minute. 100% it does.
Yeah, well, the last price I done on rolled barley was 270.
Yeah.
Now we have to put in minerals after that. I think that's around 46 euros a bag.
Yeah.
But it's small. But we have a very young herd, and they're
doing well because you have a lot of young cows in that herd, and normally you won't get your top production until they're kind of fourth lactation. Like, so you're doing well. 2.1 kilos of solids. Like, I can't tell you exactly now for our first lactations what they're doing, but that's for the herd as a whole is 2.4.
Yeah. Okay. What percentage of heifers do you bring in every year?
Well, so we brought in 16 out of 55 this year. Now, there's been years we've only brought in 10, but this year we were changing the genetics a bit, so we brought in 16. But I think the average for the first 9 years is either 21 or 22%.
Yeah, well, we had a high yielding herd, and we came off a major SEC problem and fertility problem. At our worst, we were 430 days calving interval.
Yes.
About down to 362 for the last 2 years. This year and last year. And we went after fertility, SECs, and kind of went away from the high yield as well. Going after more solids rather than yield as well.
Yes.
How far can we drop yield but keep driving solids?
I don't know. I mean, look, we're going for, I suppose, and I can't speak for Alan, but personally speaking, I like the milk PTA to be as high as possible, but I'd like the fertility sub-index to still be in the top 20%. And, you know, if you want to have 77% in calf in the first 6 weeks in the milk and herd, I think that fertility sub-index is important, and that's kind of the way I look at it.
We had our last cow calved on the 26th of March this year.
Yeah. Well, we had April calvers, like, but look at our 2024 fertility performance. It wasn't the best out of the 9 years, but again, and you'll all understand things, we had changes of staff were impacting on that. And as well, when you're only growing 9.3 ton of grass, it doesn't matter what you do, your cow's not going to be as well off. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
But we would have had April calvers this year now. But
the other thing we have changed for the last couple of years is topping.
Yes.
We do no topping.
Yeah.
Slow down the round a little bit and keep taking out bale silage.
Yeah. Yeah, well, if you can take bales and your flexibility, can you take your own bales?
We mow down, draw them in. The contractor rolls it up and bale it.
Yeah.
But we want to build up feeding for where this weather is going.
Yeah.
Like France, for the last 4 weeks, after getting massive hailstones. I was looking at a fella in America today, and he had a crop and is just completely gone with golf ball soil hailstones.
Yeah.
And what I'm looking at is over the next 5 years, this weather is going to get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
So I'm aiming to put in, I want next year's feeding in. Not next year's, the year after's feeding in as well.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly more changeable weather and more erratic weather seems to be the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, good luck with your system. There's a lot of very sound elements to it as you're describing it to me. There's a lot of merit in what you're doing.
Well, financially, I'm very happy where things are.
Good.
Yeah. So, okay, thank you.
No bother.
Right, thanks.
Finbar, I'm back in there again, Pat Donovan. Do you strip graze? Do you put a tape up in front of the cows and a lot of grass, or do you leave them into the whole paddock?
At this time of the year, they're into the whole paddock.
Yeah.
The start of the year, we might use wires, or if grazing is difficult or something, or even I saw there last week, they did it for the first third of it, not even the first third. they did it for the first 15% of the paddock, and they were actually going into a paddock that had plenty of clover, and they were just a wee bit worried they might gorge it. So they just put up a wire to slow them down a bit. But generally, the wires are out at this time of the year.
Yeah, no, very good. Yeah, that's okay. Thank you.
But if you're going into a big clover paddock now, and you know, we don't have control over the paddocks the clover does well in and the clover doesn't do well in, that's clear, like from Lions. At least we don't. But if you're going into a paddock that has a lot of clover from one that had no clover or little clover, you might be as well just to slow them down, put across a wire, and then maybe lift it at 11 o'clock or something. Do you know what I mean? In the morning, if you let them out after milking, something like that. But other than that, they're free access.
Yeah, I had a neighbour now, he did a lot of clover and he lost a few cows there, I'd say this time last year, but yeah, it wasn't pretty. But yeah, you're right, yeah. Thanks for that.
No problem. Have we any other questions or comments, lads?
Finbar, Donald Carey back in here, just with a comment. It's interesting about just the slight change that Alan has brought in there with the genetics of the herd, going for slightly higher emphasis on milk solids production, and you know, getting that balance with fertility, slightly favoured to production. So it'd be interesting to see the results of that.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. And the maintenance sub-index on those is very low, and that's the thing. You can't be afraid to use the EBI in the way that you need it to suit your own system, and we're certainly not.
Okay.
Like we will have dropped out of the top 1% overall, and our maintenance sub-index will reduce because of that, but that's fine.
But you'll gain elsewhere.
We'll gain on output, and you know, as like I don't believe you need the fertility sub-index to be the top 1% for our type of system. And if you did have top 1%, I'm not sure you'd get the output.
Yeah, no, I concur with that. Yeah.
Finbar, can I ask another question, please?
You can, of course, yeah.
What EBI for fertility should we be aiming for?
Top 20%, wherever the figures are falling. I mean, if your goal is high output, top 20%. If you're happy with 400 kilos of milk solids, you can make it a bigger priority and make your life easier. But you know, if you look back through the slides there, you'll see where ours was there, November 2024. Let me see here. But top 20%, in my opinion, if you have top 20% fertility sub-index and good management. So top 15% in November 2024 was 106. So that's where it was November. So it'll change a little bit, but it's published online normally. I'm right on that, Donald. I mean, normally you can find out where the top 20% would be or the top 15%.
Where do you get your website?
Well, you can see that on the ICBF. They'll publish that. I think it's cow evaluations. Donald will probably know it better than me, but look, we get our own report and the lads compare it back to that. Sometimes they might have to email ICBF. And because we're a research project, we probably get it back a bit quicker. But they do publish some of it online, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and Finbar, I suppose even through your report that you get back from your co-op performance, that will highlight those key figures which you want to get them for your own herd and your co-op average.
Yeah.
Finbar, I've just got a question here into the chat.
Yes.
From Evan Drake here. So it says, with the grass and clover varieties, are you seeing differences in paddocks? And also, what size paddocks are you grazing now without the strip wires?
Yeah, they're roughly 2 hectares. And are we seeing differences in paddocks? Yeah, well, we have different grass varieties in different paddocks, and the biggest difference we're seeing actually is the consistency with clover. In some paddocks it seems to do well, in other paddocks it doesn't seem to do well. There's 2 paddocks as you go into Lions, 18 and 1. They're the last 2 paddocks on the way down the avenue, and at one point we had a brilliant uptake of clover in 18 and nothing in 1. And it just seems to be very inconsistent with the clover. And then for intakes, we have paddocks there that are tetraploid only, and they seem to be very good for intake. So they're the trends that I notice, if that's all right, Laura.
Perfect, Finbar, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask another question, please?
Of course, yeah.
DBI fertility is 108. Milk is 75. How far apart should them figures be kept?
108 and 75. Well, ours for milk is in the top 1%, fertility is top 15. So milk on our 2024 one was 86 and 106. I've no optimal ratio to tell you, to be honest with you. But the only thing I would say to you, if your aim is high output, to focus on your milk PTA just as much, and not only your milk kilos PTA, your fat and protein kilos PTA, as much as your milk subindex. And if your aim is high output, you can, in my opinion, once your fertility is in the top 20%, you should be able to, with good management, get a good fertility outcome.
And the beef subindex on them cows, and what's your beef subindex for the cows?
Minus 4.9, minus 4.9. But to me, the biggest change you'll make on the beef side is actually just the use of beef sires and using sexed. So we're using sexed on maiden heifers and first lactation. And then there might be another, few cows we'll use sexed on. But generally, when you take maiden heifers and first lactation, you can put beef sires on the rest of them. And but our beef subindex, 4.9, minus 4.9.
No, but on the herd of cows itself, like.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's on the slide there. It was on the slide there today. That's what it is.
Right, I was late joining the meeting.
Yeah, but the lads will be able to send you out the slides, and you'll get all them EBI figures. Laura will send you that, no problem.
Yeah, my beef is minus 7.
Yeah, ours is minus 4.9.
Few years ago, I was going to widen the milking parlour. Now I need to narrow it up.
Yeah.
I don't agree where this is going.
Yeah.
The cows are getting too small.
Yeah. Well, if you look at our scenario, we're wanting to produce 625 kilos of fat and protein. So we need an average cow body weight of 625. And that's why the maintenance subindex on our heifers is very close to 0.
Right. Okay.
Because we're prioritizing cow size. So
you're going for a bigger cow then?
Yeah, we want our cows to be 625 kilos on average, heifers included, cows included, I should say.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Hello, can I ask a question?
Absolutely, yeah.
Just wondering, what emphasis do you put on percentage fat and protein as regards it seems to be, I just seem to be listening to, it seems to be all kind of volume.
Yeah,
and maybe that's where lads like to be, what like you put a big emphasis into, what's your view on it?
Yeah, look, it's Alan Fahey normally picks the bulls, so you're probably better, to be honest with you, to ask Alan. Let me just see, have I a note on it here? I think I have, but I know, look, certainly he will consider it. So high milk fat and milk protein PTA, and I think he puts emphasis on kilos and percentage, to be honest. So we do consider that.
I suppose like, correct me now if I'm wrong, but you could have 2 cows there doing 600 kilos of solids.
Yes.
But one cow's milk could be worth a lot more than the other.
Yeah.
Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
Because if you went on the percentages, like I'd probably do about 390 protein there now, like be 6. And I suppose, look, he seems to be picking bulls, we say, with big volumes. They have to be 250 kilos of milk.
Yeah.
But like, if you could keep down like you're looking, we'll just say, you know, I'm just probably close to figure could be wrong. You're looking for 75% 6-week calving rate. Like if you kept down the volumes, you'd probably have higher output, or you would have a bigger 6-week calving rate, and like you know, and I suppose to like a 100-meter dash, if you gave someone 20 yards of an ad, you know, you'd find it very hard to catch up to them.
Yeah. Look, I'm sure we do consider it, like, and look, I'm sure Alan does consider it as simple as that, and taking all things into account, that's where we are. There are the big changes we've made.
Oh, sure, of course, absolutely. Oh, sure, I'm taking nothing by I was there, but you know, I suppose that's it. And I suppose the question maybe someone asked there about the fertility figure. But I go, where would you want to be? I mean, what figure are they giving for a 365 calving interval? And probably that's the target where they should be going. Is it 100 or 120?
Yeah. I don't know, but look at I stand over my comment. If the fertility sub-index is in the top 20%, you should be able to get a 365-day calving interval. But the metric we use more than any other is the percentage of the milking herd that goes in calf in the first 6 weeks. As simple as that. And that's what the lads in the veterinary school tell me is the most important metric, is the percentage of your milking herd that'll go in calf in 6 weeks.
Correct. Yeah, I agree with that.
You know, we're on 77% for the last 9 years. Some of them years we were above 80%. But look, I'm sure Alan does 100% consider fat percent PTA and protein percent PTA. But look, it is what it is. That's the cow we have. We need volume as well, and that's it.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Great. There's one more question there, Finbar, if you got a second just to answer it. Just came in on the chat. It just says, would you use pre-mowing?
No, we've never used it. No, we never have, and don't have a good reason as to why we never have done it, but we just don't. Get good grass intakes, I suppose, good levels of performance most of the time that we're happy with without using it, so no. And that's the answer. We haven't. Might have discussed it the odd time, but we've never gone to it, Laura.
Great, no, thanks for that.
Finbar, how long is your rotation length?
Oh, look, at the minute I can't tell you. I'd have to check it. There's probably a number of paddocks out at the minute. There's 2 out for reseeding, and there's silage lifting off them, so it could be 15 days, something at the minute.
Right, okay. Is that hitting your butterfat?
Don't think so. What did
because
I say?
I thought from a couple of years ago, Moorpark was doing 14-day rotation, and New Zealand told them that there wasn't enough fibre going into the cows.
Yeah, our butterfat there at the minute is 3.91%. So to be honest with you, that's all right at this time of the year in May and June. A lot of herds will drop below 3.9. So it's 3.9 at the minute. I'm happy enough with that. Yeah, I'd like to see it go back to 4 and above, and it will. But at the minute, I'm happy enough with it.
The difference between fat and protein then, what? I thought it was 0.5 or something.
Well, look at the fat. Our fat there is about 0.4 above the protein, but no, I don't think there's any metric in that. I'd see nothing wrong if we were doing 3.9 fat, 3.6 protein. The difference would only be 0.3. I'd have no problem with that, none whatsoever.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So as long as the fat's higher than the protein, obviously. But we did a piece of research there not too long ago, and something like 40% of Irish herds will drop below 3.6% fat in May and June. 40% of them.
Well, you've never seen it down there, but anyway.
Yeah, I know it's common.
Right, okay.
Could I ask a question there, please?
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you're getting 70% of them calf in 6 weeks, How many days do you start breeding at?
We started this year on the 29th of April, so I don't know what day and milk they were then. But sure, we would have started calving 20 something to January, maybe, you know.
Well, put the question another way: how many days would be too early to serve?
Oh, look at probably 42 ideally. They'd want 42 days under their belt ideally. So look at, if you're starting on the 1st of May, you need them calved by the 17th of March, really, you know.
Yeah.
But
okay,
you know, in 30 days, I suppose. 30 days definitely. 42 days ideally, if that helps.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Another question, please.
Yes.
Is it financially better to calf early to milk on, or milk on calf later?
Yeah, I don't know. To be quite honest, it'll depend on each scenario, on the feed that you have to use and the cost of it to you. And I don't have a simulation done to tell you the answer, to be honest with you. But I just don't have it done.
Right, okay. Like, if the cow's calving early, you have to drive it in. And if the cow's calving late, you still have to drive it in.
Yeah, well, if she's calving early, you have to feed her, and I suppose it's more efficient to feed her in early lactation. And then what are you going to feed her? But
well,
I just don't have anything done on it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Great. I'd say if there isn't any more questions, we might wrap up, and I will just say I will make these slides available to everyone, and also this is recorded, so it will go up on our YouTube channel as well, so you can watch at a later date. Great.
Can you pop your channel that we can go in and look at, please?
The YouTube channel.
Yeah. Where this webinar
so I
on.
could it'll be actually, Ambrose, I will just take your name down there, and I can send you a link.
Okay, thank you.
If that's all right, but it'll be on the Irish Holstein Friesian, I think, is our name on YouTube. But you'll be able to find it there, and it will go up in the next it'll go up tomorrow, so that should be available, but I will send you it there, Ambrose, as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Finbar, one more question.
Yes.
So given the weather to get very hot now again.
Yes.
And should we put in more meal?
No, we've no plans, you know, unless we don't have grass. I mean, everything will depend on the grass and the level of output. So if we have grass to go in front of them, like this week is to be hot, but if we get rain again Monday, we'll be fine. So generally that's the way I look at it. So we've no plans to increase meal just because it's going to get hot this week. But if
so your pre-grazing yield then is what? What are you aiming for?
At the minute, well, generally the aim at this time of the year is 1400.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And how far are you prepared to push that?
Well, what do you mean push it? To drop it, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, if you drop it, then you possibly will run the risk. You know, if you drop to 1200, maybe you run the risk then of butterfat dropping to 3.75.
Do you fasten cows into paddocks?
Do we?
Shut the wire that cows cannot come out.
Sorry, I don't understand that.
Do you shut the wire? Once cows go in, the wire is shut and they can't come home.
Exactly.
Look, I'm heading for my mid-60s, and that's work to me. I'm gone past that now.
Yes.
So, to me, farming is a hobby. A very profitable hobby, a dash. And I don't want all this crap anymore. I used to when I started looking at farming as a hobby, the profitability went up, which stunned me.
Yes.
Absolutely stunned me. I will put in meal, I'll buy meat forward, and I look at what's going on around the world. And I would spend more time looking at what's going on around the world than I would farming.
Yes.
And I have never lost money doing it. So it's very profitable to look what's going on.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a good story. It's an awful pity we hadn't had this meeting in a hotel, Laura. That would have been a good man to have a pint with, I'd say.
If I had a pint with you, you'd walk away from me.
Yeah.
An awful lot of people have. So, okay, look, Finbar. Thanks.
Not at all. You're very welcome.
Right, thank you.
Thanks.
Finbar, I've just got one more question there. Sorry, that just came in the chat and I missed it there. Sorry.
No problem.
Did you consider buying in and using stock bulls from award-winning herds?
I don't think we did, to be honest. But look, I'd have to clarify that answer, saying, look, you'd be better to talk to our geneticist, Alan Fahy, and I'm sure many of you would know Alan, and he probably would make himself, to do an evening like this if he had time. You'd be better ask him questions like that the next time you come across him, and he does presentations regularly, so I'm sure you'll get that chance.
Thanks, Finbar. That's perfect. No, that's great. We'll have to get Alan on.
Yeah, I think you should, and obviously with a group, that's breeding and genetics group at its heart, and he'd be a great man to have to talk. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. No, that's perfect. Thank you very, very much, Finbar. Thanks for your time.
No
we
problem.
really, really appreciate it. I'm sure everyone's really got something out of this evening. And yeah, as I say, I'll be putting this recording up on our social media and on our YouTube channels as well. So it will be available for everyone to view after. So thanks very much, and thanks everyone for joining. I think we had nearly 60 people on there at one point, so that's brilliant.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks, everyone. I hope it was useful.
Thanks, Finbar. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Finbar.
Bye, everyone.